You're about to listen to Perfume on the Radio, a periodic radio show and podcast where we explore the world through the lens of scent.
Smells good, Mom.
Make any space the space. Whiffers.
Do you suffer from scent aesthesia?
This is Perfume on radio. Tune in, it's just a stereo. This is Perfume on the radio. On Lookout FM.
You're listening to Perfume on the Radio on Lookout FM.
When I was a teenager, right about the age when we start to think about our big questions, who we are, how we relate to people, what our purpose is in this world, I discovered a new genre of perfume. Up until then, my exposure to perfumery had been in the context of the supermodel era, which, as I'm sure you'll recall, was an era of big, glamorous, show-stopping ad campaigns featuring big, glamorous, show-stopping women and big, glamorous, show-stopping perfumes. But I was a lot shyer and, let's face it, a little bit grungier than all that. So when I came across a brand called Demeter that put out perfumes called Dirt and Grass and Tomato and more besides, I felt what can only be described as a sort of revelation. Among other things, perfume for me is a tool for identity. And here was a tool that facilitated a new sort of identity, one that was quite a bit more in line with how I interacted with the world and also how I saw myself in it. Love's Baby Soft? No thank you, people. I wanted to smell like dirt. As you might expect, I went absolutely bananas for Demeter fragrances. Only the Gap's Dream and Body Shop's White Musk could budge me from my obsession. It's no surprise then that when I discovered the person responsible for such a crucial component of my sense of myself, and I'm talking about the perfumer Christopher Brosius, I had a pretty deep reaction. For all you people above, say, 39 years old, it's sort of like meeting a VJ from MTV. It's a pretty serious fangirl moment. So who is this Christopher Brosius responsible for so many of my would-be teenage date nights? Well, we're about to find out, but on the shorthand, Christopher is a perfumer who came to perfumery via architecture, fashion, taxicab driving, but always with a critical eye on what we both refer to in this chat as the industry, with a capital I. He co-founded Demeter Fragrances. He's an olfactory artist, and he currently runs a company you may have heard of called CB I Hate Perfume. I'll leave it at that because we're about to spend an hour with Christopher, and of course he can tell you the rest. My name is Saskia Wilson-Brown, and I'm thrilled to bring you episode 5 of season 2 of Perfume on the Radio, an episode that we're calling CB Hates Perfume? ? I started our long conversation at the beginning, asking Christopher how he became a perfumer. Naturally, there's no easy answer. Here's Christopher Brosius.
Becoming a perfumer, and I kind of put that in quotes, is never something that was what I had in mind or planned. Mm-hmm. It was all just a series of accidents, coincidences, strange circumstances that kind of led me to understand. It's like, oh, wow, I can do something that is uncommon. The town that I grew up in was tiny. It was right on the river, surrounded by primarily cornfields and dairy farms. It was a very rural community, and my parents, as was pretty much everybody else in the area, were proper Pennsylvania Dutch Lutherans.
Wow.
And, perfume is not really on the radar. It's not something that people routinely were kind of interested in. The fancy, the extravagant, it's like anything that falls into those categories is really not forbidden exactly, but sharply discouraged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My aunt, on the other hand, was an Avon lady.
Oh, wow.
She was one of the few women that I was really, truly aware of who actually wore perfume. And she did it because it was part of her job. Mm-hmm. And, as long as something is part of your job, it's like, oh, well, then, this is what good hard workers do. They work.
Right.
But of course, since there was no real culture for understanding how perfume operates, she just wore like tons of it. I remember like a lot of times, like me and my siblings would come home from school and we'd walk in, the back door, and instantly we could tell she'd been there, or maybe she was still there. So we'd like rush up the stairs and it was like, oh, wow, is Aunt Corrine here? And my mother would say like, oh, no, she was here this morning. And we'd be like, oh, but it's like the memory definitely lingered on. It was that thing that I realized like literally decades later was one of the key early experiences that I had that really made me understand how emotionally evocative a smell can be. Even a smell that's, unpleasant. Because I have to say, the Avon perfumes, I can't say that I truly enjoyed them, but what they represented because she wore them was so incredibly lovely that it stuck with me. And like what was a negative, unpleasant thing became a positive experience. Jumping forward, let's call it 15-ish years, in my New York Columbia days, I had a similar experience when I was cab driving. Women would get into the back of the cab as they were either, like going off to have their New York evening, and they had clearly just doused themselves with some perfume that they had absolutely no idea how to operate correctly.
Right.
And this is back when Giorgio was the juggernaut that it was for. I hope that perfume is dead now. I really do. It was the most god-awful thing. It really was. But anyway, women would get in just like reeking of something. And 12 hours later, when I was finishing my shift, the interior of my car still stank. I had a migraine, was completely nauseous. There were literally times when, after someone got out, I had to stop the car and throw up in a trash can. Like, the perfume was just so horrible. And I'm like, okay, you know what? This is the exact opposite experience that anybody should have with what is supposed to be a luxury object of any kind. Even, like fabulously expensive couture clothes. You might look at a couture outfit and you say, okay, well, you know what? I don't know who designed that, but it's a little off. But it doesn't cause anyone genuine physical pain or distress.
Because you have no agency, right?
No, none.
Right.
You can't go out into public and just sort of like, walk into a public place or a restaurant or a private home and like start screaming poetry or like blaring opera at the top of your voice. Causing people around you distress is just simply wrong.
So, but how do you make sense of this as a perfumer? I mean, do you propose that basically we need to be more responsible with what we're doing, when we're doing this?
Yes. It's sort of like every artist, his or her first responsibility is always to their audience. The whole me, look at me, I want attention kind of thing. It's like, that's never been my way. It's sort of like, if you're not offering something of value to anyone, then please just stay home. You need to understand the materials. You need to understand how the sense of smell works. It is the responsibility of perfumers to not only create interesting, beautiful, attractive, pleasant smells, but it's also the responsibility to make sure that they're used correctly and responsibly, as well as appropriately.
Right.
It kind of goes back to when we were talking about, like scented trash bags. Whoever idea that was, I want to kick them. There is no reason to apply fragrance to a trash bag. Certainly not a perfume that makes it smells like, your granny.
Well, I mean, it's also, I guess maybe we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but there's a sort of cynicism to that, I think, right? Like this idea that just because we can, we will, and there we go. You get it, no matter what. I mean, I suppose people just don't have to buy them. I guess the market will prove them wrong if they think scented trash bags, for instance, is a good idea. But Christopher, let's get to your career a little bit, because I want to make sure we have a chance to talk through your trajectory.
So I come from a background where, perfume should never have really been a thing, and it wasn't. I was interested in either becoming an artist of some sort, or a scientist like Johnny Quest's father. It was pretty much brought to my attention in a sort of very roundabout Lutheran way that neither of these things were considered practical and or appropriate for, a central Pennsylvania boy.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And art was really, truly looking back on it, it was the thing that I really wanted to do. But anyone who's read Garrison Keillor can tell you it's like, this is not appropriate for a proper Lutheran.
Right.
Architecture seemed to be an actual profession that was acceptable. And I did find it, I have to say, intensely interesting.
So you became an architect, or you wanted to study architecture?
I did a special program, which was fabulous, at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. And that was a blast. And then when it came time for, actual, university, I chose, because it was in New York largely, that was my rationale, Columbia, which was ultimately, I think, a disaster. It was certainly not the right school for me. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever read that old Potboiler by Ayn Rand, The Fountainhead, which is all about...
Yeah, actually, I have.
Yeah.
What's his name, the architect? Rourke, right? Rourke?
Howard Rourke, yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, Robert A.M. Stern and so many of the other architects who were practicing at the time, it was almost comical in terms of how they were almost stereotypically identical to all of the evil architects in Ayn Rand's book. And I'm like, okay, you know what?
Yeah.
This is just not going to work for me.
Yeah.
And that's when I shifted very briefly into theater design, which was fascinating because it's much less of a commitment. You can do something really interesting, and yet it's still the same kind of concept in terms of how do you design a space so that it communicates a particular thing,
right,
to the people who encounter it. Then we went into fashion, where it quickly became clear that 7th Avenue and I were never going to get along. I was interested in a much more European approach to how clothing is made and what it was really for, whereas America is busy let's crank out the sportswear.
Right.
It was actually while I was going to Parsons that I got the job at Barney's selling cosmetics, which led to the job at Kiehl's, which quickly became, the thing that absorbed the most amount of my time, because that job was 6 days a week, 9 in the morning until God knew when in the evening, because frequently, even after the shop had closed, there were things that needed to be done. And it was fascinating. It was intense. It was pretty much like the graduate PhD crash course in everything you need to know to run an indie business before there even was such a thing. I learned a lot, and without those 4 years there, I would not have been able to form an independent beauty company myself, as it were. Perfume was very, very different. There was still enough overlap, and just the practicalities of making it happen were very similar to what I learned at Kiel.
But also at Kiel's, I think in your bio, or maybe you told me, that's also where you started making your first perfumes. Is that right? What happened there? How did you?
Well, at that time, Kiel's had this really fascinating collection of fragrance oils. I think there were nearly 130 of them.
Wow.
Customers would come in and they would ask, oh, yeah, I'd like a vial of jonquil and some cucumber and musk, please. And, we, the staff, had to then dram them out and type up a label and put it in a little bag. I always found that fascinating because at that point, it was perfume for me was still very much how the majority of people think of it today. It's this sort of mysterious, kind of glamorous, maybe slightly magical, kind of alchemical thing that, very, very, very glamorous. Mm-hmm. But working with the smells like that, with those fragrances, it was very much just a function for me of really experiencing the individual smells. as I was studying fashion at the time, it was like, oh, well, perfume is kind of like a part of fashion. And I have all these things here. It's like, well, what would happen if I just started putting them together a little bit? So in the 6 spare minutes I had, I would just start experimenting with how do some of these things fit together.
Interesting.
Eventually, in a fairly short space of time, I could put things together that actually did smell like pretty good. I mean, they were very, very simple, but it was really just kind of like fun to do. And I didn't really think anything of it. Mm. There was a Sicily scent at the time that I was fascinated with because initially it smelled just like tomato plants, which is one of my favorite smells in the world. Mm-hmm. And I loved it. So I planked out, like, I think it was like nearly $100, which in 1988 was an insane amount of money to spend on a scent. And I wore that fragrance because I loved the initial tomato leaf smell. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I was riding in a car somewhere with a friend in Pennsylvania who actually said, Christopher, I have to ask, what is that scent you wear? And I'm like, oh, well, Sicily, it's like very expensive. And I loved it, the tomatoes. And she said, well, frankly, it smells terrible.
Oh, interesting.
And I realized she was right. I realized it was right because after the tomato leaf portion burned away, what I was left with was something that smelled really like it ought to be, I don't know, maybe fragrancing a urinal cake somewhere. It was really just terrible. Huh. And at that point, I had already left Heels and was sort of casting about for something, else to do. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I want this tomato leaf scent or something that is fresh and crisp and green, but does not devolve into this really cheap, lousy, artificial chemical smell that so many, even very expensive perfumes ultimately reach.
Right.
That was kind of the beginning of what became my original company, Demeter Art and Science.
Right.
There were sort of two things that were kind of influencing that very first scent that I made under that Demeter label. I wanted to see if I could keep it to strictly natural materials, and I wanted to incorporate some of the principles of aromatherapy. At that point, there were sort of like whispers and rumors and vague sorts of like, oh, have you heard about this new thing in from France? It's called aromatherapy. It seemed kind of new agey at the time and sort of like medieval, like wise woman herbal stuff. But when I actually started looking into what aromatherapy was, I'm like, oh, wow, this is actually very heavily science-based and is a very rigorous kind of exhaustive research into the properties of a lot of traditional materials that are used in French perfumery. It's not this sort of crystal-driven phase of the moon sort of thing at all.
It wasn't quite common in the U.S. at all at that stage?
Not really, no. It was literally just beginning to make inroads here.
Okay.
And of course, like American marketers then like twisted it out of all recognition. Even today, it drives me crazy because there's so many people who are like, oh, aromatherapy. And I'm like, no. What you're doing is not aromatherapy. It might be considered aromatology, but it's not aromatherapy. Also, using artificial versions of these things will not in any way, shape, or form get you the same results as using the real thing. There is no aromatherapeutic benefit to an artificial apple smell. Let's just put it that way.
Okay, interesting.
If you want lavender, you need to use lavender, and if you want the benefits of rose, you need to use real rose. That's how this works.
How did that play a part in the original formulation for tomato leaf?
First of all, it became very clear very early on that I did not have the resources or the knowledge at the time to make my own tomato leaf. Mm-hmm. But there were a number of essential oils that I was working with that had similar qualities. You know, like that very sharp, fierce green sort of color that those smells have. I realized I was about to sort of describe a bunch of things that aren't going to make any sense to anyone, because I'm like, well, here's my synesthetic reaction to a tomato leaf smell.
No, but I mean, I'm curious about it. Like,
it's a particular kind of fuzzy, sharp, crackled, green, warm. And I was like, it doesn't have to necessarily be a tomato leaf. Let's just see how close we can get to recreating that sensation with essential oils.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. And I remember at the time there was one scent that I was able to get that I really did love, and it was marvelous from start to finish. It was a check and speak frankincense and myrrh perfume that I was able to get at Barney's. I wish they still made it because it was really lovely. I figured these are traditional classic materials, and here are all of the fabulous benefits that they have. So let's start with the foundation of that. To shorthand that, as I started to work with the materials and understand what was possible, I decided I wanted to make a modern, very contemporary scent that was a modern upgrade of the classic eau de cologne that was made by, I think, Farina.
Farina, yeah, 16 something.
Exactly. But that one was made strictly from natural materials because that's what they had.
That's all they had, right?
Yeah,
totally.
Exactly. And not only was it a lovely smell, but because of the natural materials that were used, it had all of these fabulous properties that were good physically and psychologically. And I'm like, oh, wow, with aromatherapy, you know, applying those principles, I could do this too. And that's really kind of like the foundation of Fresh Water, which was the first Demeter scent. The three principal ingredients in it were galbanum, bourbon geranium, and frankincense. And then there were like a bunch of other things to sort of like round it out and support the qualities of those three materials. Lo and behold, when I started to actually wear it myself, the reaction that I got from people around me was exactly what you want to have. It's like, oh, wow, you smell great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I'm like, what is that? And I'm like, oh, well, I made it myself and, you know, la, la, la. And they're like, can you make some for me? And I'm like, aha, I think I see a possible way of making money to support me in my old age.
Yeah. Wow. So it was that organic, huh? That's so cool.
Yeah. And I mean, it took some time. The first set of experiments, which unfortunately I think were probably trashed somewhere along the line. There were 125 variations before I arrived at the one where I'm like, this is it. Which is kind of interesting because these days, it's almost like the process has flipped completely. It'll take me weeks, months, years sometimes to like kind of narrow down the ingredients that I want to use. And then I will sit down with those ingredients and just sort of smell them periodically. And then suddenly, when everything is clear in my head, I will sit down at my desk and within 3 to 5 attempts, I have what I want.
Right.
It took me literally 20 years to go from 125, which is necessary experiments, to 3 or 4.
Yeah, that's right there, the definition of expertise. Okay, so you did the fresh water and people started buying, and then you said, okay, well, this is going to be something. And so you started Demeter officially, right?
I did. You know, I did all the practical things that we were told were necessary if you want to start a business. I mean, I wrote a business plan.
Oh, gosh, how mature.
It's funny because my original one was a good deal more like what it's like, oh, well, these are the parts of the business plan that you need and, you know, yada, yada, yada. And I had all of that crap. For me, a lot of that was very difficult because, you know, the independent perfumer didn't really exist.
Yeah, that's right. So this would have been like the early 90s. Is that correct?
Yeah, this was literally like 92 through 94.
So I remember when I was in high school buying a Demeter, it was maybe one of the first fragrances I bought. I bought Grass. if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
It was one of my first perfumes where I was like, oh, I can relate to this. It felt very much of the moment. Not to kill you with flattery here, but for what it's worth, it was extremely influential for me.
It worked really well. I mean, it's very funny. I have a difficult time, I think, and always have, sort of like absorbing the impact of my work on the world at large, we'll say.
Right.
Because I just focus on it and I do it. Of course, I listen attentively to my customers and my clients. It's like, I want to know, what smells do you people really, really, truly want to have? And what olfactory experiences are the most important to really focus on? But it's just sort of like, the whole like, oh, CNN wants to do a feature on you, or the New York Times is on the line. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what are you people crazy? When I started to do the things that were very much inspired by, like reading Colette, like the smell of dirt, the smell of tomato leaves, the smell of like
dirt was a big
beans,
one.
picked from the garden. Yeah, dirt was huge. I had the idea for doing it literally one spring, very, very early on, when I was clearing out some of the old garden beds and getting them ready for replanting. And I'm like, this smells fabulous. It's just sort of like walking out the door in the country and just getting that clean dirt smell. It's just fabulous. I want to have that in a bottle. At that point, I was working with one of the largest fragrance houses on the planet, and they very kindly gave me the run of their labs and their technicians and their perfumers, and I learned a lot from them. And also, they got a hell of a lot out of me, because basically I was doing free market research for them.
Oh, right. Interesting.
And I'm like, okay, well, I looked upon that as a fair exchange, as long as I got the fragrances that I wanted and needed. It's all a give and take. There was no such thing as free in a free market economy.
Right,
so let's just get free samples my ass. Anyway, the point is, I thought that maybe 6 people would really understand and appreciate the smell of dirt. Mm-hmm. When it became like a big, huge, giant thing, and for the following decade, it was like the biggest, most popular fragrance that Demeter made, I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. And I realized that's so often how smells, really work. The smells that affect people the most are often the simplest, the ones that we encounter every day, the ones that are really within contexts where we're not even aware of what we're smelling. But when you bring the smell, when you isolate that smell and then you present it to people, all of a sudden they're having this lovely, warm kind of interior feeling. The simple things are the most overlooked, and yet they're frequently the most powerful.
Yeah. And I think your work there highlighted that, because, again, I can only bring it to my experience, but, I was a teenager, and that simplicity, and also, frankly, the sort of reflection of reality versus these highly constructed 80s perfumes that were, I don't even know what version of a human that is meant to represent, but it didn't represent me. So, you started an awareness, I think, at least for a lot of people, as to what scent could be. But I understand that also maybe making these sort of photorealistic, simple scents can be a bit of a creative trap. Did you experience it that way a little bit?
Actually, yes. Yes, very much so. Mm-hmm. Have you ever read Norton Juster's book for children, The Phantom Toll Booth?
Yeah, actually, wow. Gosh, that's a deep cut. Yes, when I was a kid, though.
Yeah. Do you remember the Soundkeeper, the Valley of the Soundkeeper, where Milo goes into her fortress and she has like drawers and drawers and drawers and drawers full of every sound in the world?
I vaguely, and I think that may have inspired this recent book, The Scent Keeper, now that you mention it. That's interesting.
That was kind of like my mission in the early years of Demeter. Wow. Any scent that anybody truly loves and it makes them happy, I want to be able to capture that. I want to be able to put it in a bottle and keep it on a shelf so that when it's needed, You can pull it down, open it, and relive that all over again.
It's a lovely image.
Yeah, and I thought it was great. And, it was like people would comment thinking they were clever and like, oh, well, what about the smell of like some god-awful, horrible thing? Or, I'm like, no, it's not about what's sensational. It's about what's really, truly, deeply meaningful and pleasant to people. It's like there's enough irritation, horror, and god-awfulness in the world. Smell needs to go a different way. Simultaneously, I was like, okay, well, these individual smells can now start to be put together to create more complex olfactory experiences, which fundamentally is really kind of what perfume is. Now, having studied modern perfumery and traced it back to the early days of Grasse and the court of Louis XIV, okay, I understand how we got to it being this abstract, beautiful thing that was supposed to be alluring or provocative in a particular kind of way. But that's very abstract and artificial.
Mm-hmm.
I preferred to get down to the reality, the things that really evoked life. There's the time that you want the big, beautiful, fabulous French perfume by Germain Cellier, but there's also the time that you want the simple violet or the roll in the grass or, the baseball mitt.
If you're just joining, this is episode 5 of season 2 of Perfume on the Radio, and this is a conversation with perfumer Christopher Brosius.
What happened, I think, with Demeter was capturing literally thousands of smells was wonderful. But eventually, it started to become like a writer who wants to write novels or poetry, but is instead forced to write the world's largest dictionary.
Right.
It's like, I've got the words, I've got the vocabulary here, but what I really want is to start using these to tell the olfactive stories that I know can be told. And for various reasons, my partner was not interested in that. That's when I'm like, okay, you know what? I think I need to get out of here.
Yeah.
So eventually, after I sold my interest in Demeter and fulfilled my 2-year obligatory contract there, I'm like, well, it's time for me to really move on and to take what I had worked on so hard for the past decade and start doing what I truly wanted to do with it, which was explore how olfactory experiences can really be created and transmitted so people could really have a brand new understanding of like what's possible with perfume.
Yeah. And so to that end, you became interested in olfactory art and you started working abstractly, I think, right?
Well, yes and no, because it took me a long time to really understand that, like, my childhood dream of becoming an artist really had come true. I was just doing it in a medium that no one really considered to be art. It's also very curious because, like, I had, Lord, any number of clients who collected vintage perfumes. And I loved meeting with them because they would frequently bring in, gems from their collection and let me smell them. And I'm like, oh my God, this bottle of Shalimar from 1919 or, like they're from the early 20s, or one of the very first bottles of Chanel No. 5 even. These things are amazing, but perfume on that scale can't be made that way any longer because the planet simply can't produce the resources to satisfy, a demand, and certainly not at the price point that most people want to have it at.
Right.
You can make exquisite, extraordinary, fabulous perfume, but it costs a lot of money. It takes thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds to generate a little bit of, narcissus oil.
Mm-hmm.
in the very early days of I Hate Perfume, I was still thinking about everything as if it were still traditional perfume. I was just creating the smells differently. And truly, it was that way even after my first forays into olfactory art. Oh, and I love the fact that you were able to find the title of that piece that I did, which was one of the first, Everything Here is Falls.
Yeah.
That I did that for a group show on the Lower East Side that was on the theme Leave New York. I think in like 2006. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 2006. We got together like a group of New York creative people, largely from Williamsburg, to create pieces on the theme, get out of New York and why. You know, like what about New York is really just so unpleasant that you don't want to deal with it any longer. A lot of my work aesthetically to that point had been this weird reaction to me living in a really bleak, dirty, not terribly good looking urban environment, when in fact, what I was really missing most and inspired me the most was the country that I, where I grew up.
Yeah.
The piece itself was an old beat up night table, a bunch of cinder blocks. There was another piece of like some sort of wood. We basically went around Williamsburg, found a bunch of trash that people had thrown out, piled it up, and I put a Florence flask full of a green liquid that smelled like fresh cut hay.
Oh, that's awesome.
Of course, nobody got it. Because even though there was a sign, it was sort of like, smell this. Nobody understood that the point of the piece was not what you saw. It was the contrast between the pile of garbage that it was and the beautiful, fresh smell that it contained.
Right.
It looked interesting, but not interesting enough for people to really understand what the hell they were experiencing. So I'm like, okay, interesting experiment. We're going to have to refine a little bit. Shortly thereafter, I was asked by the Esther Klein Gallery in the Science Center in Philadelphia if I would be interested in doing a solo exhibition. There were 10 elements that basically explored various aspects of olfaction, as well as how fragrance is created. And there were a few pieces that explored, commonalities of scent or evolutions of, scent. One piece was about vanilla, which was like, why is it so incredibly popular globally? Where did this come from? Why is this happening?
Yeah.
That worked a whole lot better because going into it, people knew that, here, what you see is not the point. We need to smell around things.
Right.
And then there were like, smaller pieces here and there. And I did some environmental installations for like a couple of museums. Then I started getting tons and tons of requests of like, oh, hi, yeah, we run a casino and we read this thing that, like smells can influence people to gamble more and we want you to create a smell. And I'm like,
oh, they went right to marketing and coercion.
Of course they did. Of course, it's like you've been outdoors in America, right?
Yeah,
it's like if you cannot merchandise, capitalize, and monetize absolutely every aspect of life, then
you're failing as an American.
Just un-American. Yeah, exactly.
At the time, did you feel like there was a community of people who were sort of like-minded and doing what you were doing, or did you feel a little bit like an outlier? I mean, because since olfactory art has become a thing.
It's funny because I did a lot of research into olfactory art back in like 2006, 2007. Mm-hmm. And I know, like, granted, there's like a ton more olfactory artists now, but what I was seeing was, to my mind, not really olfactory art. I was seeing, like children who were going out into the forest and cutting down pine branches and bringing them to a gallery and arranging them on the floor and then calling it olfactory art. Or painting a house with vanilla flavored sugar icing and calling it olfactory art. That's art with an olfactive element.
Right.
But my definition of olfactory art is a lot more rigorous. It's about literally creating the smell itself.
Right.
All you should really need for that is a bottle or a container for the scent and a human nose. And that's it. The smell itself is the art. Now, I know full well that that presents a host of problems because, unlike music, that is not something that you can perform in a concert hall or
Right.
on the stage. To show that in a gallery, there's a huge set of challenges there to really convey the experience properly. I also am fully well aware and have read tons and tons and tons of sensory psychology studies on olfactive perceptions, and know full well that without some sort of guidelines, a lot of people, it's like if they're not prepared for the smell, it's not going to work.
Yeah, their minds cast about like crazy. They can't quite compute what's
Exactly.
happening.
And the way the human brain works, oftentimes when people can't easily categorize a smell, they perceive it as very unpleasant.
Yeah, they reject it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even if it's something that if they knew what it was, all of a sudden they love it. I've done this with the smell of Play-Doh to prove this point like constantly. It's sort of like, it's like, I'm not telling you what smell is in that bottle. You know what it is. Try and relax and go through the process for yourself of figuring it out. A lot of people are like, oh, well, I don't know what it is, but I'm curious. I'm like, oh, I don't like that. And then little by little, they will go through the process of suddenly realizing, oh my God, it's Play-Doh. And then their perception of how they enjoy that scent can change dramatically. So anyway, all of these things are considerations that make it a challenge to really understand a smell as art. It is like beyond abstract. It's like there's nothing really to touch, that you can't get a hold of it, you can't see it. It's challenging, particularly over the past, 2015, 16, 17, up to the Cooper Hewitt show in 2018, I was experimenting a lot to try to find ways that would make it possible to kind of bridge the gap between the pure abstraction of just a thing in a bottle and the person who's encountering it, to make that experience as complete as possible without over-influencing it by adding visual, auditory, or tactile clues. I really wanted to try and really truly focus on the olfactive element and yet find enough support from those other things to really make it a satisfying experience for people. The Cooper Hewitt show was all about snow, and we created this dome of snowballs that people could actually walk in, and they were hand-felted wool snowballs of a particular sort of Van Gogh snow blue, suspended in a dome that people could simply walk under. And as you kind of like walked through them and moved to them, they would jingle just like very, very lightly.
Oh.
When you were standing under the dome, gradually you become aware of the intensely subtle smell of snow.
Oh, how beautiful.
Well, this was a lovely idea. The curator of the show was correct. She said, the general public can be animals and they will beat the crap out of this thing. And they
like
did.
Literally? You mean?
Oh, no, physically. It was sort of like there were people who yanked snowballs off, or like, I got some back that were like intensely mangled. And I'm like, good Lord, what in the world are people doing here? I mean, I made enough so that we could replace them as time went on. But Michelangelo's David, it's a big hunk of marble. It just stands there in that rotunda in Florence. As long as it's maintained as it is now, it will look exactly that way 5,000 years from now.
Yeah.
The smell of
something more
snow,
delicate.
however, that if it lasts 5 minutes from now is going to be a lot.
Yeah.
So there are real significant challenges, I think, to truly understanding olfactive art. Maybe my definition is a little too rigorous. That's just the way I go about it. But I prefer the small bottle where you have the entire vast forest in like one little 15 ml bottle. And it's entirely possible. It's like I do this all the time.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't require a room that's like built out to look like a forest to get the point across that, oh, this is what a forest actually smells like, if you see what I mean.
I totally do. But it does beg the question, like, then what's the difference between a perfume and a piece of olfactory art? And my suspicion is the answer is intention.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I love that. That is absolutely the exact word that I was about to bring out. Perfume in fashion is an accessory. It's meant to make someone attractive in a particular way. Most of the time, perfume, given its history, is also very, very abstract. It's not trying to communicate one particular message, however much fashion marketers might want to say that, oh, this perfume is for the woman who's outgoing and casual and, you know, whatever, blah, 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 blah. It's like, that's all a pile of bullshit. It's really about how it smells and how well it's made.
Yeah.
Whereas olfactory art is communicating something a little bit different. Both of these things are perfectly valid.
Right.
I've been jumped on for starting with the statement, I hate perfume. And that's not entirely true. There are a lot of perfumes that I think are phenomenally, incredibly, breathtakingly beautiful. There are still people who are making really beautiful, abstract, fashionable perfumes of a truly superior quality. Art, to be perfectly honest, I couldn't say, because since my health crash a couple of years ago, I haven't really gotten out and been able to smell a lot of things that other people are going. I can tell you that a couple of major exhibitions that I went to that included olfactory art or design, I found them very disappointing. First of all, like, there were a couple of pieces where I'm like, okay, the level of fragrances coming out of here is so intensely overwhelming that I now have to leave because I'm sick.
Right.
Or they were trying to do this thing that was very, very clever, where they're trying to objectify the subjective. People do not understand there is no smell of happy.
Right.
The color blue does not have a smell.
Yeah.
So there was one piece that was sort of like, okay, well, you know, it was like these were all smells that represented human emotions, but it was a failed piece because, well, first of all, I mean, they all smelled like very poorly, cheaply made laundry detergent. That was issue A. But issue B was the whole point of smell is it's entirely, absolutely, always subjective. Yes, there are aspects of it that can be discussed person to person. You know, you can talk about like what does the smell of dirt mean to you? Why do you love the smell of vanilla? But at the end of the day, those true reasons are always spectacularly individual to one single person. That's not something that you can just sort of say, oh, if it makes me happy, it's going to make everybody happy. No, it's exactly the opposite of how it really works. That's the beauty and the magic of smell.
Right. How do you relate to the fragrance industry today in general? And are there any areas where you think that it could do better? I ask laughing because, like, how many hours do we have, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. Do you want the whole list or just the top 300?
Yeah, totally.
Well, okay. When I left my old company, I stepped back from the industry. There were a few people in the industry that I really loved to run into and really admired the work that they did. And that's still true. There are people that I think are wonderful. On the whole, I don't react or relate to the fragrance industry because I do not like it. First of all, I have been aware and or acquainted with very, very closely the fragrance industry now since the late 80s. They are still whining today about the same problems that they were then. Why aren't people buying more perfume? Meanwhile, I see very, very little true innovation. The principal focus seems to be how can we make more and more and more and more money with cheaper and cheaper and cheaper ingredients.
Right.
Where can we add fragrance, whether it belongs there or not? Chances are not. I Hate Perfume actually was the first line of the manifesto that I wrote for myself back in 1992. When I was writing my business plan, it became clear to me that what I needed to do for myself to sort of like keep things on track and keep myself focused, I needed to spell out, like the reasons. Thanks to my art and architecture training, the simplest way for me to do it for myself was to just like sit and write down a creative manifesto. Right. I based it on a footnote in one of my favorite Evelyn Waugh novels, where it was humorously talked about that a sort of surrealist invitation. On one side of the paper was a list of everything that the host liked, and on the other side was a list of everything that he hated. And I'm like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down a list of like, here's everything that I hate about perfume as the majority of it exists now.
Right.
Here on the other side of the paper is a list of everything I know it can be if you just look at it from a slightly different perspective, or get back to what it was before it was this monster of a cash cow.
Right.
That's really kind of like how the manifesto came about. So the I hate part, I hate perfume, was like the first line. The following lines were really all about all of the really intensely unpleasant things that to this day have changed a little, but not very much. The fragrance industry, they have the one idea and they just will not let it go. They still, in this country, people still have this weird idea that if you make a fragrance, you're going to make $1 billion by the end of next week.
Yeah, it's weird.
I'm not sure if that was ever true, to be perfectly honest. I mean, yeah, sure, Chanel made millions of dollars on perfume. There are perfumes that have performed financially fabulously, but you know what? When you really look at it, I think the equation is even worse than Hollywood. I mean, like, I know, like, when I was younger, the rule was it's like for every 5 Hollywood releases, 4 of them lose an enormous amount of money, but the 5th one not only makes up for the money that was lost, it makes a huge, enormous profit as well. At the tens of thousands of perfumes that are foisted on the market every year now, a tiny fraction of them actually make money and will continue, and the rest are just noise. They're olfactory noise. They're made because people still want to believe that if they crank out a perfume, they're going to be like rich, rich, rich. And that's just not the case. There's still an intense lack of originality and creativity in terms of what fragrances smell like. I still know perfumers who, even though they get to do like big, huge, fabulous designer perfumes, they know exactly how it's going to go. The marketing team from the designer is going to come in and they're going to do this big, fabulous pitch where they show the collection and all of the images and here's what the perfume to be. And then the last line of the presentation is, and we wanted to smell like the best-selling thing at the moment.
Right. My husband's a designer, and it happens in design as well. It's pretty depressing, actually. It's sort of the control of sort of marketing really over artistry.
Right. Right. I was talking to somebody recently about Angel. Angel is to this day dragged out as we'd love to have a success like Angel. And I'm like, okay, well, you want to know one of the things about Angel that made it successful? In a period where perfumes were smelling, first of all, loud, and they all smelled intensely similar. Angel came along, and it smelled like nothing else that was put out at the time. And when you look back at like Chanel No. 5, Shalimar, Pierre Balmain's Vent Vert, these were all unique scents that didn't smell like the best-selling thing at the moment. It wasn't like walking up to a department store fragrance counter now, and it's like they all boil down to the same set of basic cheap musk or woody set of chemicals at the bottom. If it's not going to be galactolide, it's going to be iso-E super and yippee-ki-yay. We all know what that smells like. But in the interest of shoving their profits 20% forward year by year, and when you combine that with now there's this whole raft of people who still want to believe that not only are they going to make $1 billion, but perfume is somehow this glamorous, magical, fabulous way of being in the world, that they want to share in that fantasy too. And that just adds to the olfactory noise.
Well, I mean, is there something that and maybe this is our closing statement here. Is there something that you still get excited about in perfumery for yourself?
You know, I'll tell you, it's difficult. And the last couple of years, because of the health issues and the pandemic, there's a lot of pressure here and a lot of what the am I doing?
I get it.
But I've really been trying to find a way to reinvent and streamline my own process and reevaluate and edit what's really kind of important to me. For the last 2 years, I've been really stuck creatively. It's been hard to focus. Then with the pandemic, it's sort of like, oh my God, well, who the hell needs perfume right now?
Right.
Well, we kind of do. There's this one group of things that literally, it's like having this vast, huge forest in 4 bottles. And I keep coming back to it. I open them and I sniff through them. And in my head, I'm kind of mulling around, what's the one best way to really express this whole sort of forest thing? And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Who are we talking to here? We have thousands of bottles in the archive. Why does there need to be the one best way? Make the smell of green leaves until you're happy.
Yeah, totally.
I do become excited and interested and inspired by the smell of the natural world. The modern artificial world, to say that it's unsustainable is the understatement of the millennium.
Yeah.
Life has got to change. People have got to start looking at things from a different point of view. Sometimes I think that needs to start with fundamentals. Enough with your fabulous designer perfume that you paid $350 for. Get back to appreciating what is literally right under your nose. Get back to reality.
That was Christopher Brosius, perfumer and founder of CB I Hate Perfume. There's nothing much more that I can add at this stage, except to say that you can learn more about his work at cbihateperfume.com. Please pay particular attention to his blog section, where he has posted some pretty excellent writing. My name is Saskia Wilson-Brown, and I want to thank you for joining me today for episode 5 of season 2 of Perfume on the Radio, a radio show and podcast that explores the world through the lens of smell. Perfume on the Radio is produced and presented by the nonprofit Institute for Art and Olfaction and is in partnership with our excellent friends at the Los Angeles radio station Lookout FM. As always, this episode will be archived on our website, perfumeontheradio.com, and as a podcast. And on that note, if you like what we do, please don't forget to rate and review us so that we can continue to bring you this pretty cool monthly hour of audio. We'll release another episode soon, but until then, friends, keep it kind, keep it real, and keep it aromatic.
Perfume on the radio. This is Perfume on the Radio on Lookout FM. This is Perfume on the Radio. Tune in, just a stereo. This is Perfume on the Radio on Lookout FM. This is Perfume on the Radio. Perfume on the radio on Lookout FM.
You're listening to Perfume on the radio on Lookout FM.